Ladies, gentlemen, magicians, magiciettes, cardists, cardistas, welcome to episode 113 of Discourse in Magic with Rob Zabrecky. This was a super cool episode. Rob is a really, really bright guy, and with a knowledge in performing and music and acting and magic. He's such a well-rounded artist, and we get a ton of knowledge from that. And it was just super cool to dive into his journey into and through magic, because we all get into magic in little bits of different ways. A lot of the times it's a variation of the story of my uncle showed me something, but this was really different. And I always find that when someone comes at magic from a different angle, then they make a huge splash and tend to do different things. So Rob has really done that, and this was a super cool episode. So I hope you like it as much as I do. And once again, a big thank you for lending us your ears for an hour every Thursday just to talk magic. I think you're really cool for letting us do that. Anyways, here it is, episode 113 of Discourse in Magic with Rob Zabrecky. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah.
My name is Tyler.
And we are here with a very special guest, and I'm super excited about it. He is an actor, he's a musician, he's a magician, he's an all-around badass, and I'm super excited to dive in. We're here with Rob Zabrecky. Rob, how are you?
Hey, I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
Just to start at the beginning where we usually start, how did you get into magic?
How did I get into magic? Well, I think I more fell into it while I was a musician in a band in the mid 1990s.
And how did that? So you were touring with Possum Dixon then, right?
Yeah, I was with my band Possum Dixon, and it was a hot afternoon, and we had done a sound check at a little nightclub, and we were walking around downtown Baltimore. And it was a real sunny, hot day. And, I was looking for a shop that had air conditioning so I could duck into and, get away from the sun for a few minutes, and there was a magic shop named Kenzo's Yogi Magic Mart. So I went in only because it had an air conditioner for no other reason.
That's actually kind of amazing. I love that. And what was your first magic experience like walking into that shop?
Well, the experience was cool off and get out, because I gotta say I wasn't I sort of repelled magic in a way. I had a couple of not great experiences when I was a kid. One with a magician, and it didn't really strike any sort of chord with me. I didn't see it as an art form or anything that was all that fascinating. And I remember walking in that store and seeing things you'd see at a magic shop, stenciled bunnies on boxes and things like that, and a straight jacket. I think I saw a straight jacket or two. And then there was this counter with a bunch of apparatus and cards and things. And I remember asking the man who worked there if he could show me a trick, maybe one that I could even buy and perform that night. I was kind of being polite, I was like, I wanted to spend 10 or 20 bucks.
You used his air conditioning. You wanted to give him something in return.
Yeah, that's right. I wanted to kind of even the score. So oddly, he said, "What about this?" And he reaches in his pocket and he produces this little silk handkerchief, and he put it in his fist and he squeezed his hand, and the handkerchief went away, and two things happened. I was completely amazed by the trick and seeing magic up close like that. And I was amazed because it was for sale and I could buy it and actually give a shot at performing it that night in front of a bunch of indie rockers.
That's awesome. And is that what you did? You immediately did the silk vanish on stage?
Well, I didn't. Pretty close. I mean, I kind of, he showed me how to vanish the silk handkerchief with the apparatus that was sold with the trick, and I fumbled with it for a few minutes and stuffed it in my front pocket. And then that night, our guitar player broke a string a few songs into our set, and I remembered the thing in my pocket. And but vanishing a silk handkerchief seemed kind of boring and trite, so I just in an impromptu way, I just yelled out, "Hey, does somebody have a wrapped condom on him I can have for a second?" and pretty quickly somebody threw one on stage, and pretty quickly I jammed it in my fist and it went away. And the audience went bonkers. They were really kind of excited about this weird little aside that I had performed for them while we were kind of gearing up for our next bunch of tunes.
That's awesome. What a great experience, both as something that sounds like it was late into Magic, which is very interesting and always produces such interesting people because we see both sides of the story, people that end up joining Magic very late and then they sort of see it immediately as a tool, or we see people very early when they learn Magic and it ends up being sort of an obsession, a lifelong obsession. So that's very interesting. And I love the idea that you performed it on stage in a show the first night that you got it. So I think that that's awesome.
Yeah, to do Magic on stage took me like 6 or 7 years of practice, right?
You're just like, screw it, I know how to do it.
Well, you know what, I just had, I'm stupid, really, and I just had to think that I could do it. It wasn't that it was done with any skill or any artfulness, or somehow it did fool people. You know, it just went on. It was just on the wire of being passable, being that no one expected it coming. No one kind of knew what a really bad thumb tip vanish looked like. They didn't know what they were looking for. They just saw that the condom was there and then it wasn't. And I was kind of just as amazed as they were that this thing slid into the thumb and everything. So I wouldn't say that it was anything genius about any of it, other than it was like, oh, I will get a kick out of this, and I think they will too.
Yeah, and you're killing time while the string change is happening.
Exactly, that's the whole thing. It was like I could have told a joke, or, I don't know, done something else to read the newspaper or something while they were change.
Being someone that comes from an entertainment background, like, you've been touring with a band and putting on shows, and that's a whole, separate kind of entertainment that you are doing on stage. What was the feeling like? I mean, did you even really consider it at the time? Like, where you're like, this is a magic trick I'm doing? Or like, did you have any sort of like connection made between the two types of performance?
I think so. I think it was like, well, this will be. I saw it as more of I thought I was being funny, and I thought it would have been something that they could have gone wrong, and it would have just been this one-time thing, and then the next night I would have forgotten about it. But after the condom vanished, everybody applauded in this way that was like a revelation of some sort, because they were applauding for me and this weird moment that happened that I was doing as this aside, but they treated it like it was like a great song or something. So it informed me a lot. And meanwhile, I've been in this band for a really long time, and we were definitely on the decline of where we had once been, as far as just happy, just as far as being a guy that was content and happy being in a band. We kind of weren't. We're on the other side of it and kind of gearing towards breaking up the next couple of years. So it was like, boy, that was really fun, and being in this band is not really that fun. So the next night we're in New York City. I'm like, guys, whatever you do, third song, tune up, and I'm going to do that thing again and see what happens. And of course that happened, and it was just really great and really exciting, and made me feel just good about being on stage. Now, meanwhile, I don't look or think like a magician in any way. It was just one moment, one method.
Yeah.
It was that's all I really had, but it was just enough to inspire me to, pick up the phone book on our drive back to LA, pre-internet, of course, and look up every magic shop from, we were each time we were stopping in, and just taking a taxi over to a magic shop and be like, what else do you guys have in here that I might be able to do between songs? So it's kind of this. It did quickly become an obsession. Once it kicked in, it really hasn't stopped, and that was sort of, I don't know, 20 years ago.
So walk us through sort of what the journey has been from magic store hopping, looking for filler bits for the band, into what you do right now.
Oh boy, well okay. Let's see if I can bullet point it in a way that'll make sense, because let me think. Well, I guess the first thing that happened was I discovered this place, the Magic Castle in Hollywood,
Mm-hmm.
and that really changed everything for me, because it first of all it gave me this idea that magic was an art form, and it wasn't that it wasn't something just to do between songs, that it was an actual thing, and it was something that was kind of greatly
It was a thing
neglected.
in and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And but at that point, mid '90s, if you can remember that time, or put yourself in that space for a second, magic wasn't in a great place. It really kind of still very much felt like the 1970s.
Right.
There's still guys in purple jumpsuits and mullets jumping around stage with tigers, and it had this very outmoded sensibility.
Right. It was almost cheesy inherently.
Yes, at that point, yes.
Yeah.
And so but you look beyond that and you go, well, okay, this is like, these guys I'm not saying every magician was like that, because there were certainly some older guys that were doing some very classic, Vernon-esque, pieces that were totally blowing my mind, but they weren't stylistically, they looked like my grandfather or something, but they, were doing some remarkable sleight of hand and really nice card work. And so that was all happening too, but it was enough to go there and go, oh, you know what? I'm really into this. And that really led to becoming a member of the Magic Castle pretty quickly. I put together a little 5-minute routine to audition with the help of my wife, and John Lovick, who was one of the first guys that I met in magic, who at that point told me he was on his way getting out of magic, which was kind of surprising, because he's had a pretty long career and hasn't left yet. So I put together this act and slowly, crept up to my audition. I passed. I became a member of the Magic Castle, and it became and has become my home away from home, where I spend, a lot of my time. Luckily, I'm from LA, so it's an 11-minute drive, currently from where I live. And it's always been within driving range. So that became this place to go, to see new magic, to appreciate it, to learn more. The library was there. I was totally into the library when I first started, and still am there pretty regularly. And just started researching tricks and magicians I thought were interesting, and different methods for things. And I wanted an act. So with the help of a lot of people, I cobbled together this act. It was like a kind of a funeral director doing magic act. It wasn't great. I had an act with my wife. We did some silent magic, basically at Hollywood nightclubs, called Griffith and Clementine, and that also wasn't great. Not because we didn't have an aesthetic that was strong, and we chose, I think, strong tricks, and we had a nice aesthetic going, but we just didn't have the stage time, and the time that it takes to make magic look like art is you're talking about years and years of experience. So it's not something anyone can do on stage, at least, well,
immediately.
I don't think. Yeah. No, I mean, certainly, we've seen people, in TV and film that have learned, a card move or two that with the right editing, cutting can look like they're, skilled practitioners. But the truth is to really do it right, it takes years, and it should, as any art form should, right? It should take a while. And so it did. And I kind of learned by being awful, and by people telling me that I should not do magic and get out of it and not perform there at the Magic Castle and stuff like that. So there's a lot of adversity to my early years, I would say, and And every musician that I knew was like, "What are you doing? Magic is so stupid. It's the gayest thing ever. Why are you doing that?" So it was kind of this like, well, I don't know why I'm doing it, but I am.
It just feels right.
Yeah, I like it, so I'm doing
it.
it.
Yeah. How's that for an answer? Get out of my way. I got to go to the Magic Castle to go to the library. I got to go look up Equivocate from Max Maven's, VHS series, stuff like that. So it was like that was it. It was like this obsession that it turned to something that I thought I could reinvent myself as a performer through, because as I mentioned, my band was on the decline and kind of broke up, and all I wanted to do was magic. That was it. It was like I woke up thinking about it. I went to sleep thinking about it. I started meeting some really interesting people at the Magic Castle, and cobbled together an act that finally got booked in the parlor there in 2002. So that was very encouraging. When I got booked, I realized that I could be a capable and kind of reliable magician in the sense of, like, I had a decent little act. I was able to perform and people liked it. And after a few years, I started becoming a popular performer there. People really started gravitating towards the character, this kind of offbeat character that I had been cobbling together with my wife. And it was like, the weirder I went with it, the more people liked it, which works out good for me because it's fun having, a character you can sort of step into the body of and into the mind of, and then when you're done, you get your life back. You feel like you've done this thing. It's like an actor doing a play or something. So that was great, and the parlor led to performing in the Palace of Mystery, which kind of the stage at the Magic Castle, which is more of the platformy stage, 125 seat thing, like small nightclub, I guess. And I got really into that idea of just taking this idea of this character and putting him on a stage, and that was exhilarating and a real thrill. And I got to meet people like Tina Leonard and Mike Caveney, who were working in those rooms, and got to start working with them on the stages there. And it just, one thing led to the next, and it was like the magic community, meanwhile, started to really embrace me, and it made me feel really good about being like a magician, which was something I would never have dreamed of, but it just started happening. It was great. And meanwhile, making a lot of new friends and really kind of like embedding myself into that
community
kind of world,
culture.
Really. And meanwhile, magic is changing, and now David Blaine's on TV. So there's like people are suddenly thinking magic is cooler than it was, I guess. And I say that term in a trepid sense because I don't think of magic and being cooler. That's a whole different conversation, I suppose. but the world's changing, and younger audiences are coming to the Magic Castle, and I start performing even more, and became interested in performing the seances at the Magic Castle, and kind of fell into that. There's a Victorian style seance that the Magic Castle puts on, where it's really around the contacting the spirit of Houdini and his interest in spiritualism and stuff like that. So got into that, and through that kind of put together a close-up act. And so now I've got a little close-up act, and I've got a parlor act and a stage act, and I'm all in. I mean, this is my life. I've got these 3 acts, and conventions start kind of putting out, interest in having me perform at different places, and magic festivals around the world are calling me up, and I kind of like suddenly found myself as a small kind of headlining act, because it's such an obsession. I put together 40 minutes of material. Like, I went in, I'm like, I really want to do this, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I was a part of a magic group for a little bit called the Unholy Three, while I was developing my act, which was an act I had with a couple other magicians. One is named Fitzgerald, and the other one was David Lovering, who is the drummer for the rock band The Pixies, and who are also putting together acts at that time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he totally.
I'm like a huge Pixies fan, and I did not even know that. I guess I'm not a big enough Pixies fan, but
Well, I was just going to say you're not that big of a fan if you don't know that David's a really funny kind of comedic magician who also had amassed a lot of material pretty quickly and under the guise of a character known as a scientific phenomenalist. So he sort of was wearing this lab coat and was conducting all these cockamamie science experiments that were, of course, magic.
That sounds awesome.
It was awesome. Yeah.
There's so much to unpack in that story, and there's a few things that I want to touch on in the journey. The first, which is very exciting, is sort of the way that you took to magic and immediately started trying to put together an act, and maybe you saw it in the lens of a career, or maybe you saw it in your history of being a performer, but immediately, you saw magic as not just something that has an endless wealth of information and studies and a community and stuff like that, but that it was an opportunity for you to get on stage and present something and do something and have a sellable act. So to me, that's a very big highlight of the story. And the second is how much you started to focus on character and being something that is different from yourself and putting something together on stage. So I'd love to touch a little bit on that, because anybody who's seen you perform, I think that it's obvious that you're doing something different than most magicians are doing. You've really doubled down 150% on a character and on, being interesting and intriguing and mysterious and things of that nature. So I'd love for you to touch on sort of why and what your goals are with that.
Sure, of course. Well, I think the first thing you asked was about, if I was going to make a career out of what I was doing, or kind of what the motivation was for doing it. And I didn't see it really as a career at first. I just saw it was a burning desire to just do this thing all the time. And the magicians that I had known, I didn't see them even, they weren't making great careers out of being magicians. It seemed like it was a part-time thing or something people were really good at, but they also had other jobs. Sure, there were some headlining acts in Las Vegas, but most of the people that were really good were people that, also had, it wasn't a career. It was a passion. It was a hobby, like real serious hobby or whatever. But for me, it was kind of like, it was reinvention. I was already a performer, so I saw it as, oh great, this is something that I love being on stage. I like performing for people. It makes me feel really good. And I love and still love the ephemeral aspects of performing for audiences that it's a one-time thing. You do a show, as you guys know, being magicians, that's it. And hopefully people aren't videotaping it to death or shooting a bazillion photos of it, that it's this weird moment that happens. And that's really what I like and continue to like about it. So that was the thing that drove me to it, was that I could be a performer. And then getting lost in a character was partially came from just me being scared of being myself, because I think I'm pretty boring most of the time. So when I could step into the skin of this character in the mind of this guy that you kind of came up with, that was really fun. And again, it's like getting in a Halloween costume. You kind of pop into it, and then you get out of it, and you get your life back, and can sort of, riff on it and make adjustments from there. But yeah, that's it. It was like, I saw this as a form of reinvention and an endless way to express myself creatively. Like I don't know, in music, I mean, everything has every art form, I suppose, has its boundaries of what you can or can't do with it. Most actors have to work with other actors. Most musicians work with other musicians. Magicians kind of work on their own. You get this chance to write, produce, direct, and act. A 10-minute close-up show or an hour one-person thing that you're putting up at an arts festival. So you've got a lot. There's a lot there's a lot of I explain that. I mean, there's just a lot more. There are more rooms to explore, I feel.
Right.
With
Well,
with magic.
With magic, you're everything, right? Like you're the actor and the director and the creator and the, like you make every decision from the beginning. And what's so exciting to see.
Not necessarily.
Well, I wouldn't agree with you there either. I think most good magicians have directors, and they have people to help them write and tweak and adjust and then tweak and readjust, and then, hey, that suit looks really stupid on you, try it another.
Right.
Like you get people that, whether or not you really want them to be, will act as those people. But you're right in the sense that when you're on stage and when that spotlight hits you right between the eyes, it's just you up there. It's up to you to carry all those ideas that you've hopefully and smartly taken and wisely kind of, put into your act. So,
and also what I mean by it,
what
I mean by it as like a reflection of what you're doing is, some people take it 1 degree and their character on stage is basically them, but then some people take it 10 degrees, 20 degrees where their character is someone completely and entirely different from them, and they think very, a lot of people put a lot of thought into the way that they speak and how that differs from who they are, or what words they say and how that differs from who they are, So I think a lot about that we have this vast opportunity to make all of these decisions as to what it is that we're presenting on stage. But yes, I do definitely see what you're saying, that, if you get to surround yourself with amazing people, then, you get to have sort of a team effort at the whole thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, what you just said is, I agree with. Yeah.
One of the things I thought was very interesting from your sort of not coming of age, but anyway, your magic journey was this idea that you had a character that you developed that you knew was kind of making your audience uncomfortable and was weird, right? And you said the weirder you got, the more people seemed to appreciate it. Now, is there a way that you sort of calibrate the level of crazy that you put on in order to ensure that it's still a positive change to your act?
That's a great question. The answer is yes. When you're doing, for example, if you're performing close-up magic, and if I'm doing a seance in the Houdini seance room at the Magic Castle, you're in a very small room with no more than 13 people, and nobody really wants to see crazy or what your idea of crazy is that close up. They just don't. There's enough people have lunatics in their lives and just might not want to have to come face to face with one for an hour, on a night that they just spend $100 to sit down and buy a ticket for. So yeah, you adjust it and you go, well, what's the sort of Orson Welles approach to this, or the Vincent Price tone that I can adjust to be like a good host, but still, as Eugene Berger used to like to say, you want the audience to think that you're a little more out there than you really are.
Right.
Because, and to add to that, something that I like to remind magicians or performers in general is like, so much of our everyday lives are spent doing stuff we don't want to do, right? You're like, oh, we have to get this internet connection right, or this phone call right, so we sound, so that you get a clean recording. You have to go to the bank. You got to feed yourself. You got to feed your family or your dogs or whatever, and you have to sort of present yourself to the world every day in some fashion. And that stuff is all pretty damn boring and repetitive, and a lot of things are really stupid that we have to do in the world. So I think by the time you're on stage, and whether you're doing your close-up act, or you're doing your walk around at your restaurant gig, or you're doing your one-person show, or your parlor act, or your mentalism act at a old folks home, or whatever you're doing in magic, you got to be extraordinary. You got to try to see yourself as the most extraordinary version of what you can be. And it's not easy to do, because you need to be empathetic. You have to be able to have people like you. You have to sort of want to be liked to some degree. So even though I've got this really weird character going on, there's something likable and affable about him. And I always have to think about that, because if you're just some weird guy up there, well, who wants to see that? Nobody.
Right.
If you're just some annoying character that you've got going, some cartoonish version of something you saw on television or character you read about in the book, and you're just like this amped up version of that, that too can be really like, it can get on your nerves pretty quickly. Yeah. So character is a tricky thing. I mean, I think there's so many different degrees, and it's something that needs to be fine tuned and in some ways just tested in a way where, like, generally audiences are going to, find what you're doing provocative and interesting.
That's awesome. That's some sound advice in terms of offering a lens to look at your act through. So you sort of naturally have always wanted to perform. You were in a band, now you're doing magic, and you've also sort of stepped more into the acting world. As you said, you like, becoming a character and putting yourself more out there. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you sort of went from magician to actor, or were you always acting, throughout this process?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it, because it was another sort of fluke. My life was one big fluke, by the way. You could cut the podcast down to like 30 seconds.
Just fly by the seat of your pants. It'll work out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Flukes with Zabrecky. Zabrecky the fluke. I had hammered out this character at the Magic Castle that I was doing at the Magic Castle, and people are responding to it. And one of my best friends, John Levick, and I were sitting there one night, and he says, you got this character, people are digging it, it's working, it's totally convincing. Why don't you try acting? And I remember it was really late, and it was like we had just done the set, and I was like, huh. And I looked at him, I'm like, I don't know why I'm not doing that. And like this little light bulb went off in my head, and the next morning I woke up, it was the first thing that came to my mind. And I turned to my wife and I said, I was talking to Levick last night, and he asked me this question. He said, why don't you try acting? And rather than her saying, that's you're now 30 years old, that's a stupid idea, magic was stupid enough, what are you doing? She said, yeah, why aren't you doing that? You're made to perform. You should be doing that. We're in Hollywood. You can probably even, who knows, you could probably have a career as an actor. Right? Yeah, at least book a commercial in 5 years. So yeah, exactly. So I wasted no time. I thought, you know what? Yeah, why? That sounds kind of like fun. Now, as a teenager, for about 6 months, I thought there was a lot of people telling me that I thought I should have been an actor. Like, certainly in high school, when I had a garage band going, the acting teacher in my high school pulled me aside and said, "Oh, I think you'd be a fine actor. You can have any role in our upcoming play, Guys and Dolls, if you'd like it." And that just seemed like the stupidest thing in the world to me, because I thought musical theater was like, yeah, I was like, I got to go smoke a cigarette and go to band practice and get drunk tonight. No, thanks. And that's what happened there. And that didn't take that ended up going some pretty dark places. On a side note, but the point is, I don't know what the point is. It's acting thing. It just was this natural thing. I don't remember now. So I enrolled in a community theater that was nearby where I lived, and dove in. And a year later, I did book a couple of TV commercials and started kind of just going for it, and embraced it like I did magic, just with like wholeheartedly. And I realized the great thing about getting into acting was every time I learned something about being an actor, it applied to my magic life. And I'm like, oh, this is working out great.
Yeah.
because
win.
It's a double win. Exactly. Because I love, it's not like I went, oh, I'm going to be an actor now. Goodbye magic. It was like, oh, I could do this too. It was like magic was becoming more and more important. As acting was like, oh, this is like, I love this. David Mamet wrote this book, True and False, and about very simple advice for actors. I remember reading that and going, oh my God, every bit of this can be applied to my acting life. And it just started, and so my magic act started getting better, and that was, it's like the whole thing just took off. And
were they
I don't
feeding
know,
each other? Like, was your magic
Yeah.
feeding your acting and your magic, and your acting feeding your magic?
I would say no. I would say no, because the biggest snag that I ran into with getting into acting was, so in magic, you write, produce, direct, and act your most of your material. Very little of it was scripts that came with the trick from the magic set. It was all stuff that really labored over to get put through my filter. So I'm used to writing my own stuff. So suddenly in acting, you're required to learn the lines of these other authors.
Yeah, and they say things like, "No, do it more sad," or what. Like, I don't know how acting cues work, but like, not only that, but you have to follow directions into how your character is going to respond, right?
Well, yes and no. In a nutshell, you just always have to want something as an actor. You want to be happy, you want to be sad, you want to react to this or that. But that's all true for magic. Anytime you pick up a magic trick, and you look at an audience, and whether you're doing a double lift or you're, doing a double levy, you gotta want your audience to want something, and to always have that in the back of your mind as a magician is the greatest, bit of knowledge you can have walking on stage. Because when you want something and you bring somebody up on stage, you can tell. And it's great to watch a magician who always wants something. And what I mean by that is not, oh, world, look how cool I am, look how clever I am. I'm not talking about that, because I hate that stuff. And performers like that make me cringe and make me want to take all my magic props and throw them in the trash. But
it's one of the most frustrating things is when you see someone butchering something that you love. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yes, that they're butchering it, and they're so pleased with themselves and the outcome, because they know they're so clever and so cute, and maybe touch themselves while looking at pictures of themselves in the mirror. That makes me sick, and I hate it. So, but the magicians who want something, they want you to really think of that card because it reminds you of this or that, or take yourself to this place, or they really invest themselves in the spectator when they're on stage. That stuff that's the magic right there, is watching a performer who's really invested. And that's just like the actor always wanting something. You watch a good actor, he's always, even if he's not talking, he's always kind of like fishing, and he wants something.
Mm-hmm.
So the very act of always wanting something from your audience is like the greatest. It's totally awesome. So that's a great thing. That goes hand in hand for magic and acting. And I think, so much of the time when you're a magician, you're alone on stage. You've got your script, but you don't always, you can't have the script for your spectators.
Right.
You can guess the 4 outcomes or the 10 outcomes that might, that you might elicit from any having anyone on stage. But at the end of the day, you just got to kind of go with it.
Right. There is no matter how much you script, there will always be an improvisational element in terms of how you have to steer your ship, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, yeah. Unless you've got a completely boring audience who gives you nothing, and you're just like, oh boy. And then, even when that happens now, I try to talk to that. I'm like, okay, this audience has no life. They're totally deflated. I'm going to talk to the deflated, and because that, and suddenly that becomes the thing that I want. I want to see if I can talk to them and get them out of it, maybe a little bit, and take them to some other place,
Right. Instead of feeling like you're butting heads with them, instead you're trying to bring them with you and take them on the journey that you're presenting on that stage.
Precisely. Yes.
So let's say that there's somebody who's listening to this and they're a big fan of your magic, and particularly some of the interesting things that you do in a show with character and with style. What would you recommend to them, to really break out of what I would call the norm of magic, which is, hey, it's basically a louder version of me on stage. Here's trick, see you guys later. How does one break out of that? Or what's some piece of advice that you have for someone to lean in the direction of putting together their own unique show?
It's another good question. I would say to give yourself some quiet time with a pen and paper and truly just try to embrace your inner weirdo and think about who you are and what you're really interested in, besides wanting to be the louder, more annoying version of yourself that we don't really want to see.
That was something I was thinking earlier when you mentioned the cool guy magician, like the leather jackets and the glasses, and the thinking magic is cool is kind of absurd. You look like a fool because you're doing something nerdy, presenting it as cool only because it's cool to you. Whereas if you embrace that it's only cool to you, it's not only cool to you, but like studying it, whereas if you were to embrace the fact that you're doing something weird, it would feel natural and organic and engaging, right?
That's exactly right. Yes. And that makes it a thing of beauty right there. That's the whole thing. But I mean, I think it's like, well, what, so it's such it's a really hard thing for a lot of people to get past that. And they can't, and they never will. And there's a lot of, well-paid performers who do just that. But, and they want to get, and I've even talked to some of those guys and they want to get past that. And I'm like, well, you got to kind of embrace the things that are really interesting to you. And like, oh, so you're a kid, you're into marbles. Well, and so then maybe that's like something that really interests you. And maybe there's some weird trick you can come up with that's got marbles in it. Maybe you're into baseball cards and there's like, you've got this crazy desire. Like there's so much of there's so many things that are interesting outside of magic that if we're really interested in them and we're invested in them, those things can become gold on stage. But, some people get that and some people don't. And so I'm not sure it's something that can really be like, it's a piece of advice that can really be digested and you just go, yep, got that.
Right.
You got to kind of really think about the stuff that really makes people, that's really funny and really weird about people are always usually the things that we like about them in the arts. It's like the more emotional risks that you take, and you go deeper and deeper into what's making you tick and why you really kind of want to be on stage, or why you really want to be a performer, or dare I say an artist, or any of those things. And then you take all that stuff, and that's when you kind of, that's when you turn it into, your real work.
Yeah, I mean, part of it seems like you have to want to do it. Like I know it sounds silly, but you have to want to do something special and unique enough to push through the difficulty of it all, right? Like if without the real desire to do that sort of thing, anybody can, and they have and they do, go to a magic shop, buy a thing, do the thing, and then over time add a few more jokes to their performance and then do that 10 times and you have an act, right? So that's one way to do it. But if you really want to be special, be unique, make an impact, do something different, be noticeable, be noticed, like be passionate about what you're doing, any of those things, it's a long uphill road. Like I love the advice of sit there with a pen and a paper, because that's like step one, right? And if that's really hard, great, there's 19 more steps to go, or whatever to bring this thing to fruition.
That's exactly it. And there's no short answer to it. Like that's the first thing you do.
Right.
And then you go, oh God, now how am I going to wrap this into an act so how am I not going to be the stereotype of this thing that I've, that people see me as, or that I've kind of fallen into and turn into something else? That's when all the hard work really starts.
It's kind of interesting.
But I take that, but I'll take that back. It's not, I wouldn't say it's hard work. I would say if you really love doing it, it's just your time being spent right. Because it's not really hard. It's like, well, yeah, some of the questions are difficult to answer, but then once you process them, you're like, dynamite, that feels really good. And now I'm able to yes, go ahead.
I was going to say just to pull it back to what you were talking about before, as that there's so much in our lives that are mundane and boring and useless, like going to the bank and buying groceries again and dusting the snow off your car, or whatever useless, boring thing. And then this is now finally a thing that isn't that, right? Like it should be that one thing which does not feel like it's a chore, it should instead feel like it's a big part of your life, and it's something that you want to do and care to do and want to watch grow and build and put hours in and be a thing of value.
Right, a privilege. It's a privilege, essentially.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that by sort of putting more of yourself in your act honestly, you are essentially removing the ego, which you'd think would be the opposite, right? Like there's sort of a cockiness that comes away when you're vulnerable, but that's really when you are doing what you love and what is important to you.
Exactly. Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Cool. So usually we're getting near the end of the episode, and with that we've got a whack of sort of wrap up questions that we use to sort of get the feel and the playing feel for how every magician thinks about these certain things. So our first one, which I'm very excited to hear about your thoughts on, is what's something in the 2018-2019 world of magic that you really enjoy, and then something in the 2018-2019 magic world that you really dislike, that you would care to not have as much of?
Well, I would say that these days I enjoy who I've kind of where my act is ended up, and performing it live is always something that I enjoy, and that's not any sweeping generalization about magic, as so much as it's a personal thing. I can't really talk about magic as a whole because I don't speak for anybody but myself. It's just how it works for me. But I can say what I dislike about this era in magic is that everything is being documented so much that you can't even do a performance at the Magic Castle where there's no pictures supposed to, which kind of shuns photography, but yet people are still on their phones, and technology's become this kind of hindrance for the ephemeral performance that you enjoy doing so much, and yet people are trying to document it or, look at texts or whatever, and that's pretty just annoying.
Yeah, it's the secrecy is harder to maintain nowadays.
But more than that, also the intimacy of a piece of theater. Like just being able to present yourself and do something and wanting to share that moment with you and the 75, 80, 100 people that are in the room with you, and not necessarily with the millions of people eating popcorn on their chest at home or whatever.
Exactly.
So one of the other questions is our question of the week. So every week, each of our guests has an opportunity to ask a question to the audience, either something that they want the collective answer of magicians from, or a question that they want to give the listeners almost as a gift to ask themselves. So what is your question of the week?
My question of the week. Boy, I'm not good at questions of the week. Because
how often do you get asked to give a question of the week? That's a strange thing to know about yourself.
Yeah, I guess I've never, this is the third one this week.
And you already used up your questions.
I'm out of answers. I mean, I think a good question for magicians to ask themselves is how do you think your audience sees you? Is a really interesting, can be a really interesting little exercise, because oftentimes how we think we're being perceived and how we really are perceived are two different things.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
for
really
sure.
valuable.
And it's something like I see in magic a lot, because there's such an intended outcome, yet it's such a chaotic situation, right? Because you really can't gauge how your audience is going to respond to something without testing over and over and over again.
No, but you can tailor every moment up until that response way more than you probably are, and that comes through repetition and obsession and creating a very strong script for all of your material, and just being completely invested in what you're doing.
And like what the question that you just asked, which is seeking to better understand how you are actually being seen, to bridge that gap between what you think you're putting out in the world and what you're actually putting out in the world.
Precisely.
The next wrap-up question is kind of similar to the question of the week, but it is a PSA, a public service announcement. You have the ears of our audience. It can be anything from stop doing this to start doing that. What do you think the Magic community needs to hear?
Stop being boring.
Love it.
When you're on stage, be extraordinary. There's no time to be boring on stage.
That's such a good
answer.
answer.
It's so simple and it's so relevant.
But it's such a good answer.
So
like,
much of
stop
Magic I find
boring.
is so procedural, and if you're not boring, neither will the procedure. So.
Yeah, I think it's a good basic piece of advice for anybody who's stepping on that stage. It's like, great, you can do magic. Now stop being boring. I love that.
Exactly. Yes.
One of the segments that we have is called the Endless Chain. So in order for the podcast to go on for eternity, we have each magician that's on recommend another magician that needs to be on. So who do you think absolutely must join us for an episode of the podcast?
I think you need to have John Lovick on your podcast.
Perfect.
That would be amazing.
Perfect. I had a feeling you'd say that, and that's a great name and someone who we'd be very excited to have on.
The next section is our favorite part. It's sort of like the take-home point for the audience. We talked a lot about all sorts of different things, from music to acting to character and all that. So we sort of highlight one thing we thought was particularly important, and we go around one at a time and share. So I'll start. I really found the simple point of stop trying to be cool to be really important, because I think that it's a thing that magicians struggle with. It's definitely where I started. I couldn't wait until I, was ready to be the next Chris Angel, so to speak. And there's nothing more awful than these fake rock stars who really detract from the art, I think. And it makes me not feel good associating with magic, but that's an insecurity of my own. That's a false thing, because magic is cool and it can be. You just don't have to be. Jonah, what about you?
I would say one of my favorite parts of this was just the general talk of the effort. I'll give that another second. I would say one of my favorite parts is just the general talk about the effort that goes into putting on a show, particularly as it involves who you are as your character. So things like not being boring, or things like, trying to be, like you mentioned about Eugene Berger saying, trying to be just a little bit more extraordinary than you would usually be, and really diving into that, because there's so many performers on stage, which is just another mildly funny white dude, and I think about that all the time, where do we need any more of those? I don't know. I think what we need instead is people doing
some hilarious black women.
No. Well, yes, but what we need instead are people doing, out of the box things, interesting things, and really putting a big piece of themselves up on that stage. So I think that was a very big take home for me. Rob, what about you? If there's one thing to highlight for people listening, what would the one thing to highlight be from the episode?
Again, highlights are not my strong point. Everything I've, it's a big conversation that we in an ongoing conversation that I guess to just always develop. Don't quit where you're at. Just always don't be afraid to reinvent yourself when you feel the need to do that. And surround yourself with inspiring people, and try to do cool shit.
I love it. And it seems like a big part of what we've hit through this episode, and particularly you hit the nail on right at the end there with sort of the struggle of putting it into words is this isn't a one sentence wrap up kind of thing. You know, this isn't a one piece of advice to take you on the road for the rest of your life kind of thing. This is the commitment to an endless journey to do something special. And it doesn't end. It only just gets marginally better every time that you put more and more work into it. So I think that that's a really good message to be taken home from this, which is that, you know, love this journey because it's going to go on forever. So I really love that.
I couldn't agree with you more. Yes.
Well, thank you so much. Before we go, a plug. Where can people find you? Where would you like people to find you, either online or offline?
Do you have any acting projects coming up you want to mention?
Let's see. I'm going to go to Paquito Mas, a Mexican restaurant later. I can be found there for about an hour. But if you're not in LA in the next hour, yeah, I got a YouTube channel, Rob Zabrecky. Instagram is I love Instagram.
I'm following you now.
Oh, great. I love black and white photography and interesting images and stuff. So I'm always posting stuff on there and kind of, I don't know. I think more than any other social media that particular Instagram is probably my favorite.
Yeah, I love Instagram.
I'm just starting to get back into it. You have the cutest dog in the world, by the way. This dog is something special.
This whole time. Yeah, he's special, all right. Yeah, yeah, he's great. We've been playing ball this whole time, by the way.
Amazing.
Well, that's awesome. A good little.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
And I was gonna say, and he thanks you for giving me this hour to sit outside and play with him, because otherwise I'd probably be behind my computer doing something else really boring. So thank you guys for giving me this hour to sit outside and look around and be here now.
Well, beautiful. And Rob, thank you so much for joining us on an episode. Very insightful. A lot of information about acting and character and performance, and just really putting in the work to do something special. So thank you so much for that. And of course, a big, huge thank you to everyone at home who joined us to be a part of this very special episode. So thank you all so much, and we will see you all next Thursday.
Take care.
Bye.
Well, there you have it, episode 113 with Rob Zabrecky. I hope you learned something, and I hope that you add a little bit of oomph to your magic for all of us, whether that means an oomph of acting or an oomph of character or an oomph of hard work or whatever an oomph means for you. I don't really know what it means, but add something to your magic, make it better, put a little oomph into it, and I'll see you guys next Thursday. Peace.